What if a single, brutally honest statement had the power to completely reshape a nation's future? In 1980, a leader from one of the world's tiniest countries delivered a warning to Australia, a warning that would forever alter its path. His name was Lee Kuan Yew, the visionary Prime Minister of Singapore. His message? Adapt or fall behind. Australia at the time was struggling. Stagnation was taking hold, and the world was changing around them. What followed Lee's bold words was a transformation few could have predicted. This is the untold story of how tough love from a foreign leader sparked Australia's remarkable turnaround. Picture this: two countries, worlds apart in size, but both at a crossroads. On one side, there's Singapore, a small island with almost no natural resources, yet under the strategic leadership of Lee Kuan Yew, it was rapidly transforming. On the other, there's Australia, a vast land rich with resources, yet stuck in a troubling economic slump. By the late 1970s, Australia was grappling with rising inflation, high unemployment, and a stagnant economy. Despite its potential, abundant natural wealth, a stable political system, and a well-educated workforce, it was isolated by protectionist policies and clinging to outdated systems. While the world around it was changing, Australia seemed caught in a time warp. It was clear Australia was losing its edge, but what could push it to confront this reality? And then Lee Kuan Yew stepped in with a message that would forever alter the course of the nation. The famous warning expanded. In 1980, when Lee Kuan Yew visited Australia, he didn't mince words. In a moment that would be remembered for decades, he delivered a prediction that many Australians found shocking, even offensive. If Australia doesn't adapt, it risks becoming the poor white trash of Asia. This was no diplomatic speech, no polite suggestion. This was Lee Kuan Yew's blunt reality check for Australia. The response to his words was immediate and intense. Australians, both ordinary citizens and leaders, were left reeling. How could a foreign leader speak to them so harshly? Many saw it as an insult, a deep-cutting critique of their national pride. It was a statement that stirred emotions, triggered defensive reactions, and led to heated debates across the nation. People began questioning, how could Lee, the leader of a tiny, resource-poor country, dare to lecture Australia, a vast and wealthy nation? But beneath the initial outrage, there was something more powerful at play. The seed of realization that Lee's words weren't meant to degrade. They were meant to jolt Australia into confronting its own vulnerabilities. His warning was that Australia's economic system, burdened by protectionist policies and outdated methods, was headed in the wrong direction. While the world was evolving, Australia risked becoming irrelevant if it didn't adapt quickly to the global changes around it. In the political corridors of power, the reaction was mixed. Many brushed off Lee's statement as a provocation, but there were some who saw it differently. Among them was Bob Hawke, then leader of the opposition. Unlike many of his contemporaries who were offended or dismissive, Hawke saw an opportunity. Instead of retreating into defensive rhetoric, he recognized the truth behind Lee's words. Hawke, a pragmatic and forward-thinking leader, realized that if Australia didn't heed this warning, the country's future could be in jeopardy. Lee Kuan Yew's tough love wasn't just criticism, it was a call to action. Hawke's response would set the stage for a transformative shift in Australia's approach to both its economy and its place in the world. And so, rather than back down, Bob Hawke took Lee's warning to heart. He began rallying for economic reforms and a new vision for Australia, one that embraced globalization, free trade, and competition. His leadership would ultimately push Australia into an era of rapid change, restructuring the country's economic landscape in ways that few could have imagined at the time. Lee's sharp words might have stung, but they lit the spark for a much-needed national transformation, a shift from a country struggling with its own outdated policies to one that embraced the future with open arms. The infamous warning from Lee Kuan Yew wasn't just a shock to the system. It was the beginning of Australia's awakening, as it is. Bob Hawke's rise and response. Bob Hawke wasn't just any politician. Before entering the political arena, he had made a name for himself as a union leader and a man of the people. Charismatic, bold, and deeply connected to the everyday struggles of Australians, he had an instinct for sensing when change was needed and the courage to act on it. So when Lee Kuan Yew issued his controversial warning in 1980, Hawke, then the leader of the opposition, didn't dismiss it as many others had. Instead, he listened, really listened. Behind the sting of those words, he heard something different, a challenge, a call to rethink how Australia engaged with the world. While many in power were busy defending the status quo, Hawke was taking notes. He understood that Australia couldn't afford to remain locked behind economic walls while the rest of the world moved ahead. The warning became a quiet fire in his strategy for the future. Then in 1983, Hawke swept into office as Prime Minister. And he didn't come just to lead. He came to reform, to rebuild. From the moment he took office, he made it clear the old ways were over. Hawke's government rolled out a bold economic reform agenda that many had long feared but knew was necessary. It was time for Australia to face the world head-on. One of his first major moves was deregulation. Hawke pushed to open up Australia's markets, tearing down protectionist barriers that had long shielded the country from global competition. This wasn't just economic policy, it was a cultural shift. Australia was no longer going to hide behind high tariffs and government controls. Then came the floating of the Australian dollar in 1983, one of the most dramatic steps in Australia's economic history. It meant that market forces, not government decisions, would now determine the value of the currency. It was a signal to the world. Australia was serious about becoming a global player. He also lowered tariffs across key industries, agriculture, manufacturing, and mining, forcing them to innovate and compete globally. No longer would Australia rely solely on its natural wealth. It had to earn its place in the new economic order. And perhaps most importantly, Hawke worked to forge deeper ties with Asia, a radical move at the time. Traditionally, Australia had looked toward Europe and the US for partnerships. But Hawke understood what Lee Kuan Yew had been pointing out all along. The future of prosperity was shifting east. Under Hawke, Australia began to reimagine its identity, not as an isolated Western outpost, but as a vital part of the dynamic Asia-Pacific region. Trade deals, diplomacy, and cultural engagement with neighbors like Singapore, Japan, and China became key pillars of its foreign policy. These weren't easy reforms. They came with political risks, public backlash, and economic uncertainty. But Hawke's leadership, backed by his deep trust with the Australian public, carried the country through the turbulence. In many ways, Hawke's response to Lee Kuan Yew's warning was a turning point, not just for his own political legacy, but for Australia's future. He didn't just accept the criticism, he used it as a blueprint for revival. And because of that, Australia was no longer drifting, it was finally steering toward the global stage. Reforms that changed everything. Bob Hawke wasn't alone in this mission. By his side was Treasurer Paul Keating, a sharp, ambitious economist with a vision just as bold. Together, they formed one of the most transformative partnerships in Australia's political history. Keating, often seen as the architect behind many of the technical reforms, worked hand in hand with Hawke to dismantle the old economic order and build something new, modern, competitive, and globally connected. Their reforms touched every corner of the economy. Banks were deregulated, inviting foreign investment and allowing Australian banks to compete globally. Government-owned enterprises were privatized, bringing efficiency and innovation. Labor market reforms made workplaces more flexible, while superannuation, compulsory retirement savings, was introduced, helping Australians build long-term financial security. Industries were no longer sheltered behind tariff walls. Instead, they had to modernize or collapse. It was tough love, but it worked. Manufacturing became leaner and smarter. Agriculture grew more competitive. Mining boomed as global markets opened up. Trade with Asia soared. Where once Australia's exports were dominated by wool and wheat sent to Britain, the new economy looked east. Japan, South Korea, China, and Singapore became key partners. Australia wasn't just selling goods, it was building relationships, investing in the region, and opening up to its cultural and strategic realities. Then came the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s, a true test of resilience. While many nations in the region struggled, Australia held firm. The groundwork laid by Hawke and Keating paid off. The economy remained stable, and Australia emerged as a pillar of strength in the Asia Pacific. It had shifted from a protected economy on the edge of the world to a dynamic player in the heart of the region. Australia had redefined its identity. No longer the lucky country coasting on resources, it had become a smart country, a prepared country, a country that had stared down the hard truth and acted boldly. And all of it, arguably, started with a warning, a stinging sentence from a leader across the sea who saw the future clearly. Australia's position in the Asia Pacific after the reforms. In the years that followed, the results of Hawke and Keating's reforms became impossible to ignore. Australia emerged stronger, more competitive, and deeply connected to its Asian neighbors. No longer isolated behind economic walls, the country embraced trade, investment, and diplomacy like never before. When the Asian financial crisis hit in the late 1990s, much of the region was shaken. But Australia stood firm. The foundations built in the 1980s, market openness, fiscal discipline, and international engagement, kept the nation resilient. A country once seen as complacent and slow to change had rebranded itself as a modern, forward-facing economy. Australia was no longer just a lucky country living off resources. It had become a strategic and economic player in the Asia Pacific, one that mattered. The long-term impact and the evolving relationship with Singapore. As time passed, the relationship between Australia and Singapore, once strained by sharp words, blossomed into one of mutual respect and strategic partnership. Singapore began investing heavily in Australian infrastructure, education, and property. In return, Australian companies gained access to Southeast Asia's booming markets. In 2003, this cooperation was formalized with a free trade agreement, one of Australia's earliest FTAs in the region. What began as a controversial warning from Lee Kuan Yew had evolved into a thriving alliance. The two nations, once worlds apart in mindset, had become close collaborators in shaping the future of the region. Lee Kuan Yew's legacy and final acknowledgement. In 2007, during a visit to Australia, Lee Kuan Yew reflected on the remark that had once rocked the country. He acknowledged that Australia had taken the challenge seriously and had succeeded. His warning had not fallen on deaf ears. Australia had risen, reformed, and reimagined its place in the world. And Lee, the man who had once issued a harsh truth, came to be seen as a catalyst, a foreign leader who saw the nation's potential even when it doubted itself. When Lee Kuan Yew passed away in 2015, Australia remembered him not with resentment, but with respect and gratitude. He was honored not only as the founding father of modern Singapore, but as a voice of reason who helped awaken a sleeping giant. It takes an outsider to show us what we can't see ourselves. Lee Kuan Yew's words stung, but they sparked change. Bob Hawke's leadership turned that spark into a national transformation. Australia's journey from the poor white trash of Asia to a key Asia-Pacific powerhouse wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And it began with a warning that dared a nation to do better. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as powerful as we did, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves history and global affairs, and subscribe for more untold stories that shaped our world.